apologize for that. So today, the Fact Club and the Teacher Preparation Program are excited and honored to welcome Dr. Edlin, Richard Edlin, to Dordt College. Dr. Edlin is a recognized scholar and speaker in the global Christian education community. In his most recent book, The Cause of Christian Education, Dr. Edlin explores the reasons for the distinctives of Christian education at the school and higher education level. This book highlights foundational belief perspectives and shows how these apply in curriculum and related areas such as vision and mission, the place of the Bible evaluation and assessment to teach as a mentor and professional development. It includes a special section for Christians in public school settings, and he writes from a background of 40 years of international experience in Christian education. So Dr. Edlin, welcome to Dordt College, and thank you for making time in your schedule to speak with us. I'm excited for the next 45 minutes.
Thank you very much. Let's commend our time to the Lord in prayer, shall we? Father in heaven, we thank you that you are Lord of all, that you're Lord of what we eat, even if the pizzas don't arrive. You're Lord of the time that we share together in our dorms, that we share together when we're just conversing with our friends, and you're Lord of the time that we share together in our classrooms as we explore what it means to honour you in the educational task. And as we talk about that today, we just pray that you would be honoured, that we would learn more of who you are and more of what it means to have the privilege of being your servants as Christian teachers. Because we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. We used to live, my wife and our three children, here in the US, and so often when I'd speak to audiences, I'd start off by saying, "Hi, my name's Richard Edlin, and as you can tell by my accent, I come from Alabama." And, some of them would laugh a bit like that, but that's where we live. Although, again, as you can tell by my accent, it's not Alabama that's home. Most of you will get it wrong if I ask you where I come from, because most of you would say
Australia.
And no, that's not right. It's New Zealand. We're pretty close, but it takes an Australian or a Kiwi to recognise the different accents. But those of us who come from New Zealand, we recognise the superiority of how we speak. Ken at the back there is from Australia, and we would say that every time someone leaves New Zealand and goes to Australia, they raise the IQ in both countries. And that gets better the more you think about it. Ken's got his own way of getting back at me. It's a real joy to be with you this morning, and I want to ask you a couple of questions, and I want you to do a job for me as we get underway in our session this morning. And at the end of our time together, we should have time for some questions, and please feel free to ask me questions about anything to do with the material that we've got here, to do with what it means to be involved in education in other parts of the world. We've lived for a number of years, for example, in Bolivia, in South America. My wife and I have just spent the last 5 years living in South Korea, and of course the main overseas venue in which we live is Australia. So if you want to ask a question about any of those sort of things, please feel free. We've taught for a number of years in government schools and been deeply involved in the Christian schools movement as well. So any questions about any of those sort of things would be also very welcome. I just want to ask you one question as we start, and that is, as you look, think and pray about what you're going to do when you graduate from Dordt, I'm interested to get a sense of how many of you feel that a Christian school is probably going to be the place that you would prefer to work in, and how many of you would prefer to work in a government school. So let's just have a show of hands. Who of you think you'd prefer to work in a Christian school when you graduate from here? Okay, and government school? Okay, so most of you, if jobs become available, would prefer to work in a Christian school context. Let me say as we start that I believe both of those contexts are very, very important contexts for Christian teachers to work in. How it means to operate in them is different, but we need Christian teachers in the public school system. And obviously, we need Christian teachers in the Christian school system as well. So they're both very important, and perhaps later on we can discuss some of the significant differences and similarities of those two contexts. Okay, that's some information for me. I want some more information now. You've got a sheet, or several sheets, and the first one is entitled Christian School Essence Statements. Christian School Essence Statements. Now, I've run this survey with dozens and dozens of Christian teachers in Christian schools around the world over the last few years. And I want you to pretend that you are going to work in a Christian school. So for those of you who said public schools, pretend at the moment, as far as this exercise is concerned anyway, that you're aiming at a Christian school. And what I was trying to do in this survey is identify what are the things that get teachers out of bed in the morning. Christian teachers who are teaching elementary school, high school, and a Christian school. Why do you do it? What motivates you? What really drives you? What is it that you really look forward to when you get in front of that group of kids or those differing groups of kids that the Lord has entrusted to your care in the particular Christian school? So I get them to read through, and I've changed the wording a little bit for your context here, but let's look at that first paragraph there. It says, we want to try and capture some of the essence of what it means to work and serve in the learning community that is the Christian elementary or high school. In other words, we want to identify what are the central thrusts that get Christian teachers out of bed and through the school gates every morning. Here's your opportunity to express in a few statements why you want to be a teacher, to share the key things that bring you satisfaction and meaning in a Christian school. These statements might then inform our discussion about Christian schooling. And I further ask them in the next paragraph, please reflect and then write 2 one-sentence statements, each of which finishes the following sentence. Being a potential teacher or staff member at a Christian school to me means, and then I ask them to finish that sentence off. And I'll go into a couple of examples here. You might say something like, being a potential teacher or staff member at a Christian school to me means the joy of helping to enable the lights to come on in children's eyes when they first discover or understand something new. Or you might say, being a potential teacher or staff member at a Christian school, to me, means having the opportunity to share about the wonders of God's world of chemistry, which is my joy and passion. I can't understand why chemistry would be anyone's joy or passion, but my wife is an example. It's a joy and passion for her. So that might be the comment that the person might like to write. What I'd like you to do, just on the piece of paper, I'm not going to collect these in, you don't have to put your name on it or anything. Do we have any other copies? There are a couple of folks who don't have one.
Yeah, right in front row.
If you don't have a copy, put your hand up. Thank you. So when you get to your classroom, you're going to be teaching in a Christian school. What's the essence of what it means to be a Christian school teacher for you? What is it that motivates you as a Christian school teacher in a Christian school to carry out the task that you're carrying out? Bottom there, I just asked you to circle either words that say statement 1 or words that say statement 2, according to what is your number 1 priority. So you've made 2 comments. Try and select which of those 2 is the single most important one, and then circle either statement 1 or statement 2 at the bottom. change them. I wonder how similar or how different your comments would be to what the other dozens and dozens of Christian teachers in other countries have said on their sheets. Let me tell you what 93% of the respondents have said, the sorts of things they've said in those sheets. Typically, it's revolved around the freedom that the teachers feel as Christians to be able to express their faith in their classroom. So, many teachers will say, well, at the beginning of my class, we can do what we did today. I can pray for what we're doing. A lot of them will say, I can use the Bible in my classroom. A lot of them will say, I remember one who said, I've got a captive audience, so I can talk about the gospel. Commonly, you'll get teachers who say, I've got the wonderful opportunity to see some of my students come to know the Lord and to lead them myself to come to know the Lord. Many, many comments, 93% of the comments, in fact, are of that sort of ilk. And it's a wonderful thing, isn't it? To be able to feel that you don't have to put your faith in Jesus Christ to one side, but to recognize that it can be part of how you operate in your regular classroom experience. But I've got to tell you, I'm deeply disappointed that 93% of the responses are like that. Now, I want you just to turn to your neighbour and say, what sort of idiot is this that we've got up the front who would be deeply disappointed at that sort of response? Just talk to your neighbour, just two or three of you talk together. 30 seconds. Why was I disappointed? Why am I disappointed in those sorts of responses?
I don't think, it's kind of in that. I think, it sounds like more of a or they can't correspond with public speakers. I mean, they're all like,
The last time I just picked it up, I just came and you told me the video tape.
Anybody brave enough to volunteer a reason for the rest of us? Why do you think I was disappointed? Anybody want to volunteer? Yeah.
We kind of discussed that some of those options are more like self-centered around the teacher,
Okay.
as in they're like, well, I've got my audience now, and I can be a part of that. And
So the classroom is this for me as a teacher. Okay. Thank you. What's your name?
Michaela.
Michaela. Thanks, Michaela. Someone else?
Those reasons don't really, I'm gonna say move well if you suddenly go teaching in the public school, you're not gonna know what to do, I guess, or it doesn't encompass everything about teaching, I think.
Okay. Okay. It's dealing with a limited sphere. Anyone else? Sorry, what was your name?
Anna.
Anna, thank you. Okay, I'll share why. Those are good responses. But the school is not a church. The classroom is not your local Sunday school or your local church. How do you define education? What's teaching all about? Well, a definition that's pretty widely used is schools are social institutions in which students learn about the world and their places and tasks in it. The definition, you'll read it in the book and you'll see it in lots of different places. Schools are social institutions in which students learn about the world and their places and tasks in it. None of those essence statements really drew out the purpose of schooling. The purpose of bringing your kids, or the parents sending their kids to your classroom, is not that you will convert them. It's wonderful if that happens. It's not that you will teach them how to say Psalm 23 by memory. Memorization is one of the other things that we even talked about. It's good if that happens. But the purpose that you have these children, these boys and girls before you, is that they will learn about the world and their place and task in it from you. That they will learn about maths and history and social studies and science and reading and writing. That you will teach them all of those things in a way that recognizes and celebrates the Lordship of Jesus Christ over all of those things. And only 3%, and another 3% later on, 6% altogether, only initially 3% of the teachers said in their responses what gets them out of bed in the morning is to look at the area of the curriculum that's their responsibility, history for example, and look at it through God's eyes. To celebrate the Lordship of Christ over how the world works. To look at God's world God's way. To understand chemistry or physics or mathematics as if this happens to be God's world over which he exercises authority and control. You know, as Christians, we believe what we read in Hebrews 1:3, which is that God maintains his world moment by moment by his word of power. So why is there such a thing as gravity? Why is there such a thing in mathematics as order? Why is there a scientific method of predictability? Why is history actually going somewhere? Why do we see geographical patterns out there in the agricultural landscape or in the urban landscape? It's because this is God's world that he maintains moment by moment by his word of power. We can't understand mathematics, trigonometry, physics, history, music, art, literature, unless we understand the belief systems that underlie that. And very few Christian teachers who have responded to this survey are able to see any relationship at all between their faith and the area of God's will that they practice. And so we teach the subject areas that we teach. We implement the discipline patterns that we implement. We structure our classrooms the way that we structure them. As if God's not relevant to any of it. And that's not Christian schooling. Christian schooling doesn't happen just because you happen to have Christian teachers. You must have Christian teachers. But then you must have Christian teachers who understand what it means to teach Christianly. 93% of the ones who responded to this didn't understand it. They didn't see the relationship between their faith and their education. This classroom is an example. I hate teaching in this sort of classroom. If you were to come to my classroom, they wouldn't look like this. Because I believe that central to effective teaching is community. We're here to learn in the context of community, from and with one another. How can you do that if we set it out like a movie theatre? Those of you on the front row here, secretly the other one's left here because you don't know what's going on behind you. And you guys up the back, all the ones down the front here, they could be sound asleep. Their eyes could be closed and they'll be gone. You don't know. Because when we set out our classrooms like this, we are actually saying something about what teaching and learning is all about. Even how we set out our classrooms is not religiously neutral. That's the expression of a certain set of beliefs about what teaching and learning is about. In this classroom structure, it says that teaching and learning is about individuals learning from some person out front. Now, I'm just using this as an example because it's a lecture theatre. It's designed for that sort of pattern. But I hope that when you go out to be teachers, and I'm sure that in the rest of the teaching areas at Dordt, you won't be sitting like this in all your classrooms. My classrooms are typically a horseshoe, usually a double horseshoe with an activity space in the middle. The students can see each other. They're part of the community. So even how we set out our furniture is not a neutral thing. It's a reflection of our beliefs about teaching and learning. And most of the respondents to that essence statement survey didn't see how their faith had anything to do with what they did in the classroom. Now at the beginning, when I asked you how many of you taught at Christian school and how many of you taught at public school, there's something implicit in that question. if we've got Christian schools over here, and we've got the other grouping of schools over here that we call public school, how would we define those so-called public schools in terms of their ideology, in terms of their faith, in terms of their beliefs about the world? We don't use the word Christian. What's a word that we could use to talk about this group over here? A very common word that people use. You talk about Christian school and you talk about secular school. So we've got Christian here and secular over there. And in Australia, this is a big argument at the moment. 30% of all children in Australia go to independent schools, partly funded by the government. All Christian schools in Australia are partly funded by the government. And over 30% of all children in Australia go to independent schools, and Christian schools make up a cluster of that. But the other schools are called secular schools. And the big argument, and I know it's a big argument here too, we lived in Alabama for 7.5 years, so it is part of the state, as I said before. You have this debate about the separation of church and state, and that gets brought into education on the basis of, well, the Christian schools have got the religious education bit sewn up, and if you don't want religious education, you go to the secular school. That is garbage. Now, I want to hear you say the word. Say after me, garbage.
Garbage.
Right, thank you.
They
That,
say trash.
that idea of separating Christian as being somehow religious and secular as being somehow not religious is garbage. Secularism is a religion as strong and as powerful and as influential and as mind-shaping as is the religion of Christianity. What many people confuse is the idea of theism. Christianity is a theistic religion. Secularism, by and large, is an atheistic religion. But it's a religion nevertheless. All education is seeking to shape students according to some view of the world. That's what education's about. The textbooks, the material in them, the selection of them, the training of the teachers is all done because this is what we believe. There's that belief system again. This is what we believe is the best way of educating. And secularism is a belief that educating without reference to God is the best way of educating. But it's a belief. It's a religion. If you look on your sheets, you'll see that on page 2, there's a diagram at the bottom of the page there. And this just reinforces the argument that I'm making. There's a definition there from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the definition of the term religion. And the definition is a cause, principle, or system of beliefs held with ardor and faith. The cause, principle, or system of beliefs held with ardor and faith. That's it, the dictionary definition of religion. Is Christianity a religion according to that definition? A cause, principle, or system of beliefs held with ardor and faith? Is it? Yes, it is. Is communism a religion according to that definition? A cause, principle, or system of beliefs held with ardor and faith? Yes, it is. Is Islam a religion according to that definition? Yes, it is. Is secularism a religion according to that definition? A cause, principle, or system of beliefs held with ardor and faith? Yes, it is. Secularism is a religion. And in Australia at the moment, we're trying to grapple with, in the public arena, the notion that many politicians and many non-Christians are putting forward, that secularism is the best way of establishing social intercourse in the public arena because it does away with religion. You want to do away with religion, then you bring in secularism. It's a very cunning argument. But they're not doing away with religion. What they're seeking to do is to impose, in a monopolistic way, one religion in the public sphere at the expense of all other religions. They don't put it that way. They like to say, well, this is non-religious. but it's as religious as Christianity. It's a non-theistic religion that says we want to exclude theism from the public sphere, and by that we're going to bring about some sort of tolerant neutrality. And what we need to help people to understand is that that is not tolerant neutrality, that is intolerant domination of the public sphere by one particular religious perspective. And it's why I use one of the most commonly referred to dictionaries in the United States anyway, as the origin of this definition. Because, often when you're talking to non-Christian people, if you quote the Bible to them, quite rightly, they don't see that as being authoritative. We look at Acts 17 when Paul went to Athens and he first started speaking to the Athenians. He didn't start quoting the Bible to them. He said, when I came into your city, I saw that you're very religious. And I saw all these statues of this god, that god, and every other god. And many of them are still there on the Parthenon there in Athens right now today. And he said, and I even saw statues to the unknown god, just in case you missed someone out. He actually referred to their understanding of the world. He said, in him we live and move and have our being, even as some of your own poets have said. And it's important for us as Christians, when we're engaging in discussion with educators who don't share our belief system, that we understand their belief system. And we can use their belief system as a pathway, as an on-ramp, like getting onto the freeway, as an on-ramp to get into the discussion. And so that's why I've used this definition from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. I want to do away with this notion that somehow non-Christian education is neutral. How do I do that? Well, I introduce them to the concept of religion from one of their authoritative sources, which shows that their approach, their secular approach, is as religious as is mine. And then, of course, we've got a wonderful opportunity to say, why should your religion dominate the public sphere at the expense of every other? The United States is a pluralistic society. We shouldn't be imposing one religion on everybody in the public school system. Why do we have to have our separately funded Christian schools in order to have our religion when we have the state school system dominated and funding one religious perspective of secularism? It's not just in a pluralistic nation such as this. Now, just to underscore the notion of the non-neutrality of education, I've given you a whole swag of quotations. Swag, you might not.
I'm not going to understand swag.
A number of other quotations here on this sheet.
It has a much different definition here.
Does it? Okay. There are several comments on this sheet. Is that all right? Can I get away with that?
Absolutely.
Very good. That I'm just going to leave with you. And I won't go through all of them, but perhaps the second one, David Watson. This is an older quote, although the one above it by Richard Lewington is more recent, but they're both saying the same thing. Talking about the non-neutrality of belief systems that exist in our world today. Watson was one of the professors of comparative anatomy at University College in London. So he was top in the world in his area of science. Not a Christian. Look at what he says. This is partway down, fourth line, toward the end of it. He says, concerning evolution, he recognized that the evolution was, quote, a theory universally accepted, not because it can be proved by logically coherent evidence to be true, but because the only alternative, special creation, is clearly incredible. Both he and Lewington say, I believe in evolution. I'm committed as a secularist, as an atheist, to evolution. Not because it's particularly believable, not even because it's particularly scientifically valid, say these great scientists. But they say, I believe in it because they refuse to believe in the only other alternative, which is special creation. See, their belief structures are shaping how they approach the world. There is no neutrality. Francis Crick, a name that those of you who are working in the sciences will be very familiar with, one of the co-discoverers of the molecular structure of DNA. Crick says this: you, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. You're nothing but a pack of neurons. Now that's a religious statement. There is no such thing as anything beyond us. You will all know of John Dewey, signed the first and second Humanist Manifestos, one of the greatest fathers of contemporary American education. He helped us to come across some good things. But Dewey was an out-and-out atheist, and he brought his religious perspective to his education. He says, for example, in one of his books, that the child is the sun around which the educational universe revolves. It was garbage. God is, for the Christian. We want to be child-focused, but we're not child-centered. The purpose of education is to challenge children with the celebration of the Lordship of Christ over every area of life. They're only going to be equipped to live in the world in which we live if that is the belief system that underlies how they understand that world. Well, as far as Dewey's concerned, as far as Crick's concerned as well, that's garbage. They bring their religious perspective to bear on how they understand education and to shape many of the textbooks that we confront when we're doing teacher training. I won't read Richard Rorty's comment, but if you're into post-modernity, Rorty, who died just a couple of years ago, one of the great fathers of post-modernity, and he says that the purpose for most professors in American universities today, when they go to their lecture halls, isn't to teach a subject. The purpose is to make Christianity look ridiculous. That's his quote here. You read it. He doesn't go to the classroom with any pretense of neutrality. He's got a belief system. He's got a religious commitment to secularization. That's what he calls it. And that's what he's trying to get across. And he says most American professors and universities in this country today are committed to the same thing. There's no neutrality. Secularism is not neutrality. It's another religion. There's some quotes there also by Chuck Colson. One by George Counts, a non-Christian, talking about teaching. It's a very powerful quotation. Where a non-Christian American looks at education and he asks himself, what's it all about? And he says this. He says, education involves the affirmation of values and the framing of both individual and social purposes. Well, we could stop there, couldn't we? If education involves helping kids to recognize and adopt a set of values, how could it possibly be religiously neutral? But he goes on. Inevitably, he says, education conveys to the young responses to the most profound questions of life, questions of truth and falsehood, beauty and ugliness, good and evil. Well, again, how can that ever possibly be neutral? You either have God at the center who defines what goodness and truth happens to be. Jesus didn't say that truth was an idea. We don't understand truth if, like many people, we see it as a concept. Jesus said in John 14:6, I am the way, I am the truth. See, truth is not fully understood unless it's understood in terms of a relationship with Jesus Christ. So education conveys understanding of what truth and beauty and ugliness is all about. These affirmations may be expressed in what an education fails to do, as well as in what it does, and what it rejects, as well as in what it adopts. I just wish I had more time with you. I've got some tremendous little resources on social studies, a little booklet that's used in public schools in New Zealand called Man the Language Animal. And the title actually tells you what the rest of the book says. It says the one thing that makes us different from the rest of the animals is that we've got a fourth part to our brain. Dogs don't have it, cats don't have it, elephants don't have it, but human beings do. And that's what makes us distinctive. And that's what this book teaches. Garbage. We do have a fourth part to our brain that those animals don't have, but is that what makes us human? That's the bringing of a certain belief structure into teaching 12 and 13-year-old kids, not neutrality. But Counts goes on, he hasn't said what he really wants to say yet. He says, to a very large degree, education was the handmaiden or midwife of catastrophe. See, education doesn't necessarily bring about goodness. We believe that it does in many of our cultures. Oh, if only people in Liberia had more education, then life would be so much better for them. It's garbage. We lived in Bolivia for 5 years, the poorest country in Latin America. you lived in a neighbourhood where there was no electricity, no running water, and many of those people were much, much happier than many people in our culture. You know, some people learned how to fly airplanes, came from the Middle East to Florida, learned how to fly airplanes. They got an education. What did they do with that education? They flew those planes into the Twin Towers. Education doesn't necessarily bring about improvement. It can, but it doesn't automatically do so. It can serve tyranny as well as freedom, says Counts. Ignorance as well as enlightenment. Falsehood as well as truth. War as well as peace. Death as well as life. And then his final statement is his most powerful. Take out the words men and women and put in the word children, and you see what he's saying. Education may lead children to think they are free, even as it rivets upon them the chains of bondage. Education may lead kids to think they're free. What you do in your classroom may lead kids to think they're free, even as you rivet upon them the chains of bondage. You know, and I see that in North Korea, where they're taught that their president is God. If I go to an Islamic country, they know education is not neutral. We were missionaries with SIM, the Sudan Interior Mission, for a number of years. You go to the Sudan, and they know that education is not neutral. But our education is not neutral either. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How do we do that in our culture? Well, you've got 20 churches in your town here. In the town that I come from, in Sydney, probably, I don't know, maybe it's got 50 or so, but they're not buildings with a steeple, they're the shopping malls. Because that's where people go for their fulfillment. That's where they go for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Or what do we do tonight? Oh, let's go to the shopping mall. You know, we buy the latest iPhone 6, and that's going to make us happy. And next year it'll be the iPhone 7. And the iPhone 6 ain't going to do it any longer. But we believe we bring kids up in a culture that individual attainment, that the acquisition of stuff brings about fulfillment. How much of your wardrobe have you thrown out before it's been worn out? How often do people on average in the United States buy new vehicles before the vehicle they've got's been worn out? We teach them that individual acquisition of stuff is the way to find happiness. And so, yeah, our tabernacles, our big churches are our big shopping malls. It's not that stuff's bad. It's like money. It's not that money's bad. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil. It's the love of stuff that is replacing the true God with a God substitute. And in our education, we teach the competitive spirit. We teach the acquisition of stuff. We teach getting a good job with a high pay is going to bring fulfillment in life. And that's not Christian, and that's garbage. We can lead kids to think they are free, even as we rivet on the chains of bondage. We've got to keep going. Sorry, I'm being sidetracked. Edlin and Vincent Millay, who tried to express this disillusionment. She wasn't a Christian. She'd been through several marriages. Her life was quite challenging. And she was trying to express the notion that there's got to be a better way. There's got to be something that makes sense of it all. I thought that a good marriage was going to bring fulfillment. I thought that a good job at a good university was going to make me happy and was going to bring it all together, and it hasn't. Where is the meaning? Where is the purpose? And she tries to express that here. Let me read a few poems and maybe you read it out loud. Upon this age that never speaks its mind, this furtive age, this age endowed with power, to wake the moon with footsteps, fit an oar into the rollicks of the wind, and find what swims before it is prow, what swirls behind. Upon this gifted age, in its dark hour, falls from the sky a meteoric shower of facts. They lie unquestioned, uncombined. Wisdom enough to leach us of our ill is daily spun. But there exists no loom to weave it into a fabric. Undefiled proceeds pure science and has her say, but still upon this world from the collective womb is spewed all day the red triumphant child. At the heart of her comment is that second stanza. She's saying, look, there is so much knowledge, so much information about out there. And she wrote this in 1939. Think of what she'd be saying today with the electronic media that we've got available to us. There's so much information and knowledge out there, she says. There's wisdom enough to get rid of all of the problems of mankind, but there's no loom to weave it into a fabric. It's like there are all these strands hanging around out there, and we can't make sense of it all. Well, the glory, of course, is that there is a loom. There is something to make sense of it. And that's understanding God's world, God's way. And that's what Dordt College is all about. And we need Christian teachers who don't separate their faith from learning about the nitty-gritty of the content areas of the classroom, but who see one as being built upon the other, who see a biblical worldview filtering up through like coffee in a coffee percolating machine, that where your faith, your commitment to Jesus Christ shapes how you see all of those subject areas. One of the challenging areas people will say is mathematics. How can you, isn't 1 and 1 2 for a Christian and for a Muslim and for a secularist? How can you teach 1 and 1 or mathematics Christianly? Well, I've seen all sorts of ways that people go about it. The best answer to that question is found as an appendix in the Cause of Christian Education, where a Christian head of science, a head of mathematics in a Christian school here in the United States addresses that very question. And she said that for much of her teaching life, she struggled with that question and never found the answer. The question she tried to work out was, how do you bring God into maths? And she thought, well, maybe, we find some Bible verses that talk about numbers. Well, there's a whole book that talks about numbers. If I quote from numbers, does that make my teaching Christian? And she knew it didn't. That didn't somehow sanctify how you taught maths. Well, how do you teach maths as a Christian? And she realized that she was asking the wrong question. After many years, she realized that to ask the question, how do I bring God into maths, wasn't the right question. Because God's already there. Maths is one of the languages He has given us to help us understand His world. And then she explores what that means in that little essay that's only been published in my book, where she talks about a great discovery that she made in that area. There is no neutrality. When you're looking at how to discipline children, when you're looking at policies, when you're looking at how you involve parents in the life of the classroom, how you organize schools structurally, how you set out your classroom, how you teach your subject area. The glory and wonder that you and I have is to be able to bring all of that underneath the Lordship of Jesus Christ. I've gone over my time. Thanks for being so patient and waiting for your answers.